The Game Plan is a production of Disability Rights California, a space to strategize, organize, and posterize for the future of the disability rights movement. For more information on our work, please visit us at disabilityrightsca.org.
So, welcome everyone to our first ever podcast episode of The Game Plan with Disability Rights California. My name is Eric Harris. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Associate Executive Director of Disability Rights California's External Affairs Unit. And I have with me today an amazing advocate, a wonderful leader, and a even more wonderful human being, Vanessa Ramos, and she is in our investigations unit. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. And hi to all of our viewers. I'm so thrilled to be here. It's the first podcast and it's like long overdue for so many reasons, but I'm just so thrilled to be here. And I love your fresh headphones. I just gotta say it. I can't get over them.
We had to, the first episode, we had to do it right. You know,
That's
we had
right.
to look good, feel good, sound good, all the things. And hopefully, even though there's a lot of challenging things happening right now, and we're going to talk about some of it, this is exciting. And hopefully, people enjoy it. We welcome feedback, and we'll keep getting better as we move along. But let's go ahead and get going here. Um, so Vanessa, you and I uh, go back a little bit now, and it all started, unfortunately, I guess, because of Care Court, and we're going to talk a little bit about Care Court and kind of what DRC was doing at the time initially when Care Court was announced, when we started with advocacy meetings and coming together. Um, but do you remember that, like what that was like when we were having those
Yeah,
big meetings? And can you talk a little bit about it?
sure thing. Yeah, I mean, what an awful time, right? Like what a scary time. What a confusing time. Um, I remember Eric just feeling at a loss because I intuitively knew, like my body told me, like there's things that are happening fast, and I don't know that I'm fully understanding. And coming from the county mental health system and county public health system, I'm like, wait a minute, if I'm not understanding the intricacies of this, in this meaning, the CARE Act, then I know for sure people outside of government aren't understanding. And I just really remember feeling like we got to do something. And
Mm,
I started looking around at like who's down to get down. And sure enough, you and Andy were just ready to grind it out. And I'm like yeah, like that's the team I want to be a part of, because of the protection and advocacy portion, and also because mental health conditions can be disabling, right? A lack of access to healthcare can be disabling, right? We know that poverty is disabling. We know that certain demographics of people find themselves receiving care, appropriate care,
mm,
while other groups may receive care. It
mm,
may be inhumane, but I guess it is care,
mm,
and your assessment and your understanding of these issues, just gave me a lot of hope. It
mm,
just gave me, and I'm not saying this because we're on the podcast, but I mean, I felt very inspired by what was possible, even if we weren't to win the
mm,
CARE Act fight. Um, I knew that we were willing and ready to be on the right side of history.
mm. Yeah. No, that's a wonderful point. And I think, you know, when Care Court, the policy was brought forward, um, I was relatively new in my role at the time as the director of public policy. Um, I had done disability policy work in Northern California, in Sacramento, in the Bay Area, and in Washington, D.C. We had a brand new, um, pretty brand new executive director at the time, Andy, who has had decades of policy experience and advocacy. Um, and we both kind of looked at each other like, this is really bad. And to be in a state like California, we always are talking about promoting civil liberties. Everybody has freedoms, make your own decisions, make your own choices. The disability rights movement started out here in the Bay Area, all of that. And we're looking at this policy and we're just like, this seems
Right.
really bad, right? And when we started, we would have meetings and kind of bring people together and do Zooms because at the time it was like deep in the pandemic. And I remember advocates like yourself were like, all right, like we hear that DRC is doing these meetings and like this is helpful, but like we got to get after it because like this is scary. And people with mental health diagnoses, unhoused people, people of color, we're going to be jacked up by this stuff. And we need an advocacy organization to be leading the way and bringing up, other leaders and other organizations to help them lead the way on this fight. And I know at the time, we all recognized that the governor and other people were heavily involved. And it was like, are we really down? Are we really going to do this? Because we know there's going to be pushback. It's going to be hard. But we ultimately knew it was the right thing to do. So that was what made it easy to work with you and other colleagues on this issue. Because we were like, we know that these are people that are really going to be down for this. So it was a great beginning to our collaboration, and it's only grown from there.
Yeah, no, thanks, Eric. And as you were talking, one of the things that comes to mind and came to mind is the lack of civics education and knowledge that people have. I've noticed that, somewhere along the line, we started pulling civics out of the classrooms
Mm,
and people's understandings of what an elected's responsibilities are and how we the people, like, they work for us and they are our representatives, how little by little we pulled civics out of the classrooms, and then little by little we have these relationships with electeds where they're no longer like happy to see us, right? Like they're almost like celebrity like in California. And I don't know where, some of our viewers are from, but let me just tell y'all that here in the Golden State, shout out California, we're kind of ruthless when it comes to state government, right? Like
mm,
one would think that we're speaking to celebs. It's very hard for people to meet with their representative. It's very difficult for
mm,
people to actually trust that their representative is going to do what's right for them because we understand that the state reps, the legislatures, they're faced with so many bills that they have to read, and there's so much technical information that I highly doubt that all the staffers have the bandwidth to be able to really understand what implementation of some of these bills are. And that's where I feel extremely proud, Eric, that, I know for you, I remember early on, you told me, Vanessa, like really my dream, my wish, my hope, my fight is that legislative advocacy is born out of the disability community, meaning you want for there to be, bills that are developed and created in conjunction with the legislatures, with
Mm,
the family members, and that solutions come from the community, because currently it's backwards.
yeah.
So, orgs like DRC are constantly fighting against this or fighting against that. And it's like, nobody wants to be, pardon the phrase, a Debbie Downer, but we understand that the soil is currently bad. The
Mm,
soil is not based in power. It's not based in solution, right? It's been corrupted and co-opted by lobbyists and special interest groups, and
yeah.
this group thinking just about this piece, but not talking about this other piece. And we need that collective experience that also includes, the family member's perspective, and shout out to the pets and, the family, the friends who are family, right? Because as a woman living with disabilities, I know that I am who I am because of the people that love me, because of my faith,
Mm,
because you know, disabled people come with a network of support, and unfortunately, some of these fights have created a split, a tear, a rupture between understanding what is best for the individual, what is best for their network of support, and how it's actually very aligned, right? But there's been a lot of wins in having us fighting against each other and not
that's right.
spending time in developing bills collectively, which is what I think the future holds, Eric. And I'm just so proud, to serve with you, to build power. I'm so grateful that Carolina Valle, right, is now with us, and that DRC is investing in power building, and we're, what we didn't know then, we know today.
Yeah.
You know.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, you know, you and I both have disabilities. We're proud to talk about it. It's Disability Pride Month, July, and we acknowledge it's part of our identity. It's part of who we are. If you want to know our whole selves in terms of Vanessa and Eric, you got to know that we have disabilities. We live with disabilities. Our families, a lot of our friends, like this is our community, right? And I think that when it came to care court, one of the things that I felt, and I know our organization, DRC, felt was really important, as you said, is that the community, the disability community, is leading the conversation, and that there shouldn't be any policies in place that are going to directly impact people, directly impact a community without input directly from that community. So and I know you mentioned it a little bit, but can you just mention some about your experience, your direct lived experience? Because I think lived experience is kind of put out there and different folks use it in different ways. And I think for this specific issue, for care court, how your lived experience is directly impacted potentially by care court and some of these other policies. But if you could just talk a little bit about your experience, your lived experience with your disability, your lived experience with just navigating these systems.
Yeah, sure. And, I mean, my origin story is one of rape, right? Where, my parent, my mother, who recently just had top surgery. So it's like mom, dad, like my queer parent came out young and was not accepted, understandably so. It was a big shock for my Central American grandmother, who is, has her beliefs, which, I'm a woman of faith. So, I'm a part of the faith community. And I say that not proudly because it doesn't need all that, but I just say it because I think we live in like a cancel culture that we're slowly moving out of, right? And I'm just here to talk about the real, which is my mom came out, my mom ran away from home, right? She was in Hollywood with her girlfriend. She is a sexual trauma survivor. She was raped. She was pregnant with me, amazingly decided to move forward with the pregnancy. I'm born, but the environment was not set up for my mom to be able to thrive, right? So my
Mm.
mom was not able to just go apply for a job because she looks very masculine, right? So employment opportunities weren't necessarily available for my mom. So my mom sold Coke, my mom sold Coke at a drag bar that still exists to this day. I was raised in the queer community and in the evangelical Pentecostal community. So half the week, was one way and the other half was another way. And I'm so grateful for the way that I've learned to love and to accept and to belong and to be.
Mm.
And navigating my own life in those transitions, I naturally needed extra support. I had a little bit of um, problems with my speech. I was in speech therapy as a kid. Today I understand that I'm neurodivergent. Today I understand that, mental health is a part of the disability identity umbrella. I didn't know that back then,
Mm.
right? So growing up, I didn't know that there was a reason why, I behaved a little differently than the other kids. Like
Yeah.
today, I think it's one of my superpowers. And I also know there's there's certain medical care that I access on a weekly basis. But now I'm more of a better resource person. Growing up, navigating life with a lot of complexities, being a sexual trauma survivor myself,
Mm.
I didn't have a place to go access support. Street drugs are oftentimes more available than a prescription drug is, right? So to get a
Mm.
prescription medication, you have to have insurance, you have to go see a doctor. The doctor writes up the prescription, you have to go to the pharmacy, you have to right? So there's
Yeah.
this long drawn out process. I didn't have access to a lot of those services. And for me, I ended up, falling in love with drugs, and I ended up on the street. I ended up incarcerated. I was, I'm somebody who used throughout my first pregnancy. I'm so grateful for my child's life. My child is now 24 years old. But 24 years ago, I found myself in a solitary confinement cell when Los Angeles Twin Towers used to hold women, and I found myself in the basement
Mm.
of Twin Towers, still lactating, no access to healthcare. No one's doing medical, examination questions, right? They're booking
Right.
you in. They're putting you through this, this harsh system. And I understand that I had broken laws. Like, I totally get that. But people weren't asking why, nor did they care. And Eric, let me tell you that because of
Mm.
good policy, I was able to access drug diversion. I
Mm.
was able to access drug treatment, voluntary drug treatment. I was able to have my first experiences at working with a therapist, at, being a little better socialized, at better engaging my family. And although I relapsed several times, dude, I needed all those touches, those service touches, because it took a little while, but I finally got to a point, Eric, where not only was I able to have my second child, who's now 16, but I've been able to go back for that little girl that was scared, that was
Yeah.
confused, that was inspired,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that felt loved and unloved at the same time. And I could now go back for her and heal from that point, but it took a lot for me to get to where I am today, which is why, I can't overlook harms
That's right.
against our communities.
That's right. And I think it's so crucial. And I'm very fortunate that Disability Rights California and you recognize the connection directly to the disability movement because it is so important that our movement include everybody with disabilities. We can't pick and choose, right? We can't be like, all right, we want these folks a part of our movement, but not the people who are unhoused or part of the criminal legal system or et cetera, part of the foster care system because like they're too complicated or whatever. Like we can't be like that. And I want to, you know, move back to care court, and I really appreciate you opening up about your journey because I've known your journey for a long time. I've gotten to know you super well, and I'm glad that our listeners are getting a chance to know you better as well. So care court, as it went through the process, and I've been involved in policy for 10 plus years. Andy has been involved, our executive director, now CEO, has been involved in policy for over 30 years. And we were just blown away that Care Court was just moving forward, moving forward, moving forward without any resistance in terms of no votes. People who were willing to push back in the legislature. A bunch of organizations like Disability Rights California, the ACLU, LA CAN, different mental health peer organizations, racial justice organizations, the NAACP, a whole bunch of organizations came out and opposed the bill. But as we know, unfortunately, similar to a lot of the bills in this space in California, it passed nearly unanimously. And I just want to get your thoughts as somebody who is not a policy person. Like that is not your chosen path in terms of like the advocacy that you do. You recognize that policy is a part of this and we got to know what's going on in the legislature or city hall or whatever. But as an outsider, so to speak, what were your thoughts when you saw every single vote just yes, yes, yes over and over? And we're sitting there as advocates, and you in particular as somebody with direct lived experience on these issues, and you were like, no, this is going to hurt me. This is going to harm our community. Our community is going to be in a bad spot. And people were just like, yeah, yeah, whatever, got it, yes. Or they might have
Yeah.
said, oh, we hear you. We have concerns too. Yes. And you're just like, do people not know how bad this stuff is? So if you could talk about just how that process was, what it was like kind of experiencing that.
Yeah, no, for sure, Eric. The process was alarming. I was very well, and let me also mention that I'm also a family member. So during the care court fight, um, I've been very influenced by the mental health and the substance use peer recovery community networks. My wonderful mentor, Tina Wooten, who passed a few years back, taught me that there's no empowerment without employment. And I knew that to be true. So I knew that moving people out of the disability poverty trap, I knew that was a thing, right? I knew that disabled people that are receiving benefits, oftentimes are disencouraged to work because they could lose all of their health care benefits, right? So if you make a certain amount over, you're gonna just be like done, right? Like, so I knew of these types of fights, but really by being a part of good and understand that peer support is very powerful. Um, is my connection a little fuzzy?
It like pause for just a second, but I think you're okay. Maybe if you go back and just say what you just said again.
Sure, sure. Okay, so will you ask me again? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so basically the legislative process went through
Oh
almost
yes,
without a
yes, yes.
hitch.
Yes.
that the legislature, you know, we would
It's
meet
so
with them
fast.
and they were just
Hmm.
like, anyways, so,
Yeah.
or they might say, oh man, we hear you. That's really terrible. And like, we hear your concerns, but then they'd still go and vote yes on it basically without a hitch, except for two people, Assemblymember Cholera and Assemblymember Stone were the only two no votes, but everybody else essentially voted for this. So just give me your thoughts on the process.
Yeah. Yeah. So regarding the process, you know, I was shocked that these legislatures weren't stopping to think about why are so many advocacy orgs so opposed to this, right? I was shocked that they didn't want to engage us. Like it was almost as it felt like they were told not to engage us. It
Mm,
felt like, oh, this is something that people don't want to touch. And what that started to open me up to was, wait a minute, this is a rogue process. What? This is it's no longer like what I thought when I was a little girl going to Sacramento, right? From my, you know what I mean, in the first grade,
yeah,
right? I'm like, when I toured the Capitol back in the day, back in the 80s, what I thought the process was and what the process is now is completely different. I thought that if there was a, you know, controversy that your electeds would want to talk to you to find out what your concerns were.
mm,
So I was really naively shocked that there are lobbyists that are like involved in all of this, that there
yeah,
are legislators that are actually thinking about their other bills. Like I had no idea, like, oh, if the governor wants to eventually be president and they have like a mental health crisis, to speak to, they have to come up with solution. And I didn't realize that other electeds want to appease a governor so that they can then, move forward politically, or that some of their interests, right,
right,
become a catered to. I had no idea. I was,
right.
you know what I mean? So I
Yeah,
was shocked. I
and
was
it's
shocked.
interesting, right? Because we get told all the time, like we want to hear from the community, right? Like we want the community to feel like this is an open door. And at the end of the day, I think you and I probably talked multiple times, and we're like, these elected officials work for us. Like we're the ones who are voting for them. We're the constituents. So, like over the years, and I think Care Court was the first, and that was our origin story in terms of our relationship and kind of how you deeply got connected to DRC. Now we've seen the expansion of the definition of gravely disabled. We've seen expansions as it relates to forced treatment, forced mental health care. We've seen Proposition 1, which was up for the voters to fund a lot of these systems and kind of programs, nearly lose in our favor. It would have been wonderful. Uh, but like, what do you think Disability Rights California's role should be in some of this? Some would say your guys' role as a advocacy organization is to provide the legal analysis, and basically that's it. Some would say, no, you guys are more important than just providing legal analysis. Like, yeah, you want to provide legal and policy analysis, but you also have a CEO with lived experience with bipolar disorder. You have other advocates that have lived experience. You have a PAMI advisory committee, which is essentially our uh, piece of our board of directors that are focused on mental health advocacy for folks with mental health disabilities in the state. You guys are bigger than just like provide some analysis. So what would you say? And I know that you mentioned our power building and kind of what we're trying to do in that space. We have a communications team as folks are witnessing here. Like what would you say in terms of Disability Rights California's role in this space as we engage on some of these fights.
Eric, thank you so much for that question. I really believe that the virtual town halls that DRC are hosting, like, I think that's a really great way for us to have healthy debate. I look forward, to having, a bill come up, right? And for us to have open virtual dialogue with people that support the bill, people that oppose the bill, and for us to have healthy, real life on camera debate, respectful debate, but pointed debate, right? And I really am very excited to include not only family members, but a person's ecosystem of support. Because for me, as a family member, as I was, saying, and I'm not sure if we caught it because I know I was having camera trouble, but during the carrot court fight, you know, I experienced a chilling moment when I learned that my little brother, who is my cousin by blood, was behaving erratically. And I was shocked to see him on, the 7 p.m. news. And I was shocked to learn that my grandma's house was tear gassed because he had a mental health crisis that led to some very serious um, incidences, to say the least. And as a family member, I had to ask myself, very honest questions like, would a care court have helped him? If care court was enacted, would that have helped him? Because although I received voluntary care, I knew that for him, he was unwilling and he could not see that he needed help per his own admission. So if we would say, hey, like, you're eating out of the trash, like, you need to like change your shoe, like you're walking around as if you're in house, you're not in house, like, why are you under the bridge, right? We would find him in different places. He wasn't connecting those dots any longer, right? So he once
Yeah.
upon a time was working, was driving, was in relationships, loved music, was a your average 20-year-old kid, and then all of a sudden things changed. He stopped working, he stopped driving, he stopped showering, he started setting pieces of paper on fire at the back of my grandma's house. He started to have these symptoms, and whenever I would reach out and I would tell him, hey, I'm clean now, I'm going to therapy, right? He would say, that's you, like, there's nothing wrong with me. So there was something
Mm.
going on with him where he wasn't connecting with the reality that he may need support, right? So right in the middle of the care court fight, I started to see all this, and I was forced to look at things differently. And Eric, let me just tell you that unfortunately, care court on paper and by the rhetoric that was being shared by the governor and Susan Eggman and Umberg and all these people and the big city mayors, it sounded like care court was going to help. It sounded that way. But because I was working at DRC, because I had access to the bills, because
Mm.
I had access to communities, I was like, wow, people like me, like family members like me, think that care court is going to help my family member because I'm going by what these people are saying. But when we started looking at the details in the bill, we're like, wait a minute, it's actually not going to do a
Yeah.
lot of what people think it's going to do. And because we were in the middle of the fight, we couldn't really start talking to the family members or to the groups that were in support of care court. Like, that felt wrong to me. I felt like I just needed a moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And And I know that, you know, one of the things you and I talked about is how can we make sure that um, Disability Rights California can be a resource, not just, an outward facing advocacy organization. But to your point, because you had access to the information at Disability Rights California, you had access to the lawyers, you had access to folks who are doing this advocacy and can get into what the bill might do and this and that. Because I think what you and I have spoken about a number of times is whether it's, mental health peers, whether it's formerly or currently unhoused folks, whether it's people who've been involved in any of these systems, including the criminal legal system, whether it's parents, family members, almost all of us want the exact same thing in terms of like, we want our loved ones or we want this community to have access to housing. We were very clear about that all the way through the process, access to some form of mental health care that is best for them. And ultimately, other services, other opportunities, being able to make their own choices, have access and opportunities to have jobs so that they can provide for themselves. Like all of these things you and I have talked extensively about. And I think one of the questions and one of the things like that you and I have engaged on, how do we bring in the other maybe smaller organizations or the organizations that don't have a lot of resources, organizations that are fighting tooth and nail to hold on? Like, what role do you think DRC can help kind of play for some of them as well?
What a generous question, Eric, and I really appreciate you thinking about community, and community orgs in this way. I know that one thing that became very apparent during Care Court is that there are organizations that are receiving funding through state and county grants, and they felt very restricted. So even though they were opposed and they knew that this was not that, yes, something had to change, and yes, we can totally see that people are suffering out on the streets, and no, we're not saying this is okay. Like, we know that something's got to give. We're just saying this is actually not it. And in moving forward, I think that one of the things that Disability Rights California could do is really have more of that statewide network and that national network where conversation is ongoing,
Mm.
so that we provide a form of mutual aid where you, Eric, are the associate director of external affairs, and you oversee legislation, you oversee policy, right? You staff lobbyists, you have legislative advocates, right? So you have access to information that can really benefit other orgs. So I think that if we almost like train the trainer model,
Mm.
if we are able to come up with roundtable discussions where we share the knowledge, but we also learn from community on what those solutions are, but not just learn for them and stand on ideology. I'm talking about, and I know this is unpopular at DRC, but this is just the truth. I have had friends who told me, Vanessa, I hurt my family member. Like, I needed to be in a locked place. Like, I wanted that. I wanted to be in a setting where I needed, like, when I came to and when I realized what I needed, I didn't want to go home after. Like, I needed a step down. I needed a place to go. Or, like, hey, Vanessa, they weren't going to release me out into the community. So even if the community based services exist, because of the law that I broke or because of this, that, or what have you, I'm never going to just be released out. So rather than be in this intense hospital, like, I do want that step down option, right? And the reason why I say that, Eric, is I'm not promoting forced care or voluntary care. I'm saying that we need to better understand what is the continuum of care that meets people where they are and that provides the support to people's real life needs, not what we believe in ideologically, not what we believe in a utopian world, but in real time,
Hmm.
how do we help get people out of these jailed environments and into services where their health care needs are met? And this takes mature conversations. And I just want to give, a short shout out to our board member, Karis Myrick, who has for years talked about the importance of including family members, for years has talked about the importance of having versatility, right, in the services that people have access to. So rather than us standing on ideology, how do we start to invite family members in? How do we start to invite, conversations in that maybe go against what we have been taught is wrong? And how do we respect the journey of somebody else while uplifting the rights, the protections, right? How do we strengthen statewide patients' rights advocacy? We know that with the passing of Prop 1, there's going to be so many facilities that are built. And honestly, Eric, some are good, some are bad, and there's ugly parts, meaning there's services that are going to be cut. So we know that if there's going to be an expansion of services, all those new clients are going to need access to patients' rights advocates. Has the state prepared their workforce in that way, right? Who are
Yeah.
the patients' rights advocates that are going to be there for these people that are now going to be receiving some of the care? How do we learn from the substance use community treatment service models that started peer based and have had so much success? I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
In substance use treatment, when you would go into detox, you go to detox, then you'd go into residential. As you navigate your residential treatment stay, you would end up getting a job. You would end up moving into transitional living, right? You would end up going to school. You would end up, growing in your role if you wanted to stay and become a substance use counselors. And many of my friends are now running the same treatment centers that they were a part of, like the detox. They were once in detox, now they're running the facility.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for this is because in the substance use treatment world, recovery is possible.
Yeah.
People can and do get clean. What I've noticed is that in the mental health services lane, if you have an emergency, you don't go to detox, right? You get 5150, you go into a psych hospital. If you go into a psych hospital, the setting in its nature is very cold, it's very limiting, right?
Right.
The
Right.
doctors are the ones that have the top say, right? If you leave the 5150 unit, a psych unit, and you may end up in an outpatient place, right? But the type of services that you receive are still very much dictated by a medicalized model, which I do believe that some medicine can be helpful. But what I'm saying is that in the mental health lane, the way that the career path or the life path of a person has been very much minimized to make sure you're on your medication and have a great life. It,
Right.
it
Right.
isn't based in employment. It isn't based in, your environment. It's not based in the 8 dimensions of wellness, right? It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
about financial literacy. It's not about, you can recover, you can go on to do great things. Oftentimes that system is very limited because the top of that level is normally like a psychiatrist and not another person in recovery. So I just say that
Yeah.
to uplift peer support services as its own model of care that can work hand in hand with other disciplines, including the therapists and the psychiatrists and things of that sort. But that framework, I believe, is missing the influence and the input from the person that is living a life in recovery from their illness. And I understand, Eric, that there are some people whose struggles may look a little different. And I do believe that their natural supports can be keen on helping develop these systems. But currently, I think we've been pinned against each other.
Right.
Meanwhile, things are being built without our input, which is leaving the person needing care at the end of the line and not at the beginning of the line, while politicians have to come up with these band-aid solutions.
Right.
And currently in Care Court, most of the money is going into building out the actual court system, right? The process system. We're not seeing a huge increase of services available. There was already a workforce shortage, right? Where
Well,
are these bodies going to come from to help people heal?
yeah. And I think that to your point, and you and I have talked about this before too, um, because we still have a housing crisis in California, right? Like whether it's the lack of housing, the expense of housing, all of it being connected, we still have a housing crisis. People are on the street, people are often living with housing insecurity where they got to go from place to place, etc. And I think that we've acknowledged this is all in reaction to the visual homelessness that we see in LA, San Diego, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Sacramento, all these big cities, right, throughout the state. And I know, we're coming towards the end. We're in the fourth quarter, if you will, of our show. And I think one question and issue that we really want to try to tackle is how do we move forward? You know what I mean? Like these bills keep coming up, the rhetoric continues. You have people who are in elected office who demean and put down folks who are unhoused and folks who are living with mental health disabilities. You have a lot of circumstances where, in many cases, peers and people with lived experience are not being listened to by anybody. They're not being respected. Um, so what would you say in terms of like how can we move forward? How can we move forward together? And how can we move forward with hope and like believing that like some of this stuff is going to move in a better direction?
Thanks for that question, Eric. Localized fights I think are still really important. I think, for people that, are interested in, some of these issues, whether it be, housing or mental health related issues, I think it's really important to like stop by your local county mental health office and ask them, hey, if I need services, what do I need to do to enroll? If my family member needs services, like we need to be our own key informants. Like we need to navigate that process, right? We need to ask, hey, let's make the call. Hey, if I'm seeking housing, I'm unhoused. If I'm seeking housing, how long is it going to take me to be housed, right? And I think it's also, Eric, about really understanding the diversity of people that we're speaking to, where, I really want to uplift the no more bill policy, right? That you're really leading the no more bad bills, the no more amendment culture. I think the reason why that's so important, Eric, is because if we're really gonna get to that place that you'd like for us to be, where legislation and policy is coming out of the disability community, and including their loved ones, if we're really going to build together, we can't waste time fighting, you know, for an amendment. That's a lot of time that's wasted. I think rather than spending time on investing on like what would make this bad bill better, I think picking up the phone and having conversations. I know that I've had the great honor of speaking to people like Dr. Emily Wood, you know, who helped write SB 43, who I, you know, as someone, as a harm reductionist, as someone in you know, long-term recovery from substance use, I was like, Dr. Wood, like, why would you include substance use? Like, what people are are going to be able to be 5150 for being on drugs? Like, what, you know? But by sitting down and by talking with her directly, I learned the why that happened, which has helped me better shape, you know, the specific points that I want to make sure that in Los Angeles County, the county where I live, right, that certain pieces aren't confused. Because in speaking directly to Dr. Wood, I learned, oh, the reason why they included substance use was because if you have a mental health need, or if you appear gravely disabled, and the minute that you test positive for drugs, it becomes an insurance thing. Are you going to be in the mental health wing, or are you going to be in the substance use wing, right? It gets very confusing. Also, you know, in working closely with Dr. Brian Hurley from Los Angeles County Substance Abuse Prevention and Control, I was able, you know, to learn from him. Yes, Vanessa, this is true. For substance use alone, that is not grounds for grave disability. Now, if the person is exhibiting a series of other behaviors, then that is what the person will be held on. But if I just don't engage with anyone in my local county because they're the enemy, or I don't engage with somebody who had something to do with this bill, then I'm missing out on the opportunity to better understand the why. And that's where I strongly believe, Eric, that the hope is in loving each other. The hope is in, for me personally, I pray, you know, I ask God, you know, Lord, give me the strength, like allow me to grow in my capacity, you know, allow me to see what you need me to see, Lord, allow me to hear what you need me to hear. Like, help me understand why this is happening. And oftentimes, Eric, when I take the time to take care of myself, you know, and I take the time to care for my colleagues at DRC, and I take the time to care for people that are behaving in ways that I find unbearable, oftentimes the solution comes, and the solutions do come in conversation. So I, you know, I thank you so much for not only your time here today, Eric, but for your willingness to have virtual town hall conversations, for your willingness, you know, to host dialogues with family members, even if it looks on the front that we don't agree on things, right? To really have healthy debate. You know, I think that the way forward is an open dialogue, right? Because we know that we're on the right side of history, you know, and really, Eric, other people think that they're right as well, you know. So how do we move towards a world where we get to be right together, and we get to really invest in the health and the wholeness of not only the disabled person, but the ecosystem that surrounds them? Because when I'm good, my family's good, right? And if
That's right.
my family's not good, I'm not good. So it's not one or the other. I think it's this collective power. So I think approaching things from a spirit of curiosity, you know, I think approaching things from a spirit of integrity, you know, which requires a lot of self-care. Carolina and I work closely, and you work closely with Wesley Witherspoon, who's also on our board. And Wesley teaches us so many things, but one of the things that Carolina told me that he said earlier today was, man, in life, you got to learn how to be your own best friend.
Mm,
And, you know, I thought, how real is that? You know,
that's
I
right.
need to know what my bandwidth is, right? I need to learn how to take care of myself so that I can better, show up for others. And, an accessible world is a kinder world,
That's right.
So I think the more that we lean in with inclusion, with accessibility, with love, I think that, the better, we will end up. So I'm not sure if that fully answered your question, Eric, but that's what I
You
think.
I think you tied a knot on this first episode perfectly, Vanessa. I really appreciate you and really excited. This was our first ever podcast at Disability Rights California called The Game Plan with Disability Rights California. And I think this issue right now is the top issue for Disability Rights California, for our colleagues, for advocacy partners. And I really, really think that a lot of people are going to be really appreciative of the work and of the information that we shared. And we will be sure to post a bunch of resources. So if people are like, I heard them say this, but I have no idea what they were talking about, we're going to have it available so that people can follow up, so that people can do their own research. And as Vanessa said, we're going to keep having the conversations. So it was wonderful to connect with you on this. And I am so fortunate that I get to work with you every day and navigate these spaces because it's a lot of work, but we're about that life. So I think it's really helpful and really wonderful to have you on our side.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you so much for having me. And I love being a part of the Disability Rights California team, and, if anyone wants to reach out, they can find me on social media, and email me, call me, and I'm sure we'll post my information, my contact information. I'd love to, get in touch with people. And sorry, Eric, but just very briefly, I just wanted to highlight the beautiful work that you and so many others primarily Dolores Canales led with the fight against solitary confinement because I think with the Mandela campaign, we were able to see what happens when people impacted are leading the fights rather than when the policy people are leading the fights. I think like the Mandela the fight against solitary started very policy, very lawyery, and I remember Pamela Lou saying, "What about Dolores Canales?" And I remember when we brought Dolores in, um, with immigrant defense advocates, right? Hamid and Jackie, it really shifted the movement, right? It's like we saw policy, even if the bill has not passed and did not pass, we saw that community has been built, right? And there's conversations that are held because of those fights. So whether a bill passes or fails, that's really not what's important to us, right? Like we're
That's
in
right.
it, for the long haul, for the long game. So we want to build, community out naturally and organically. So I don't know if that made sense, but I mean, feel free to edit that out if needed.
And we always appreciate it, Vanessa, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, our goal here at Disability Rights California is to always have disabled people lead, empower them, and encourage them and be alongside them, be however we could be supportive. That's what we do. And that's how we've done this advocacy. So once again, it was wonderful to have you on our very first episode of the game plan with Disability Rights California, and I look forward to the next steps and all the things that we're going to be involved in moving forward.
Thank you so much.
This has been The Game Plan, a production of Disability Rights California. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the platform of your choice. See you next time.